We've lost our moderator for this session. We'll self-moderate. We do have a few questions, and then can certainly open it up for discussion. Mike, you want to kick us off?
Oh, yeah, sure. Mike Hale, I'm with VitalSource Technologies, responsible for the North American education business.
Aurora Martinez, and I work with Wiley. I am the general manager for one of our verticals for math and science in particular.
I'm Stephanie Soscia. I'm with Packback, and I'm our general manager of institution partnerships.
Okay. And Joe Rohrlich with Top Hat. I'm a CEO. I've been there for 120 days, so just enough to be dangerous. So I think where we wanted to start this conversation was obviously the last 15 or 16 months have brought about changes in terms of content, but the real area we wanted to focus were our thoughts on the lasting changes. So there's sort of the immediate reaction, and we thought it'd be more valuable to focus on what are the lasting changes and themes that we believe are going to persist. So Mike, I don't know if you want to get us started on that.
Oh, sure. So VitalSource kind of sits in the middle of the course materials ecosystem. We're partners with everybody, managing digital course materials and have a platform. So we've been in the digital game for a long time, and what we saw during the pandemic was really an acceleration of a trend that was already happening. So one of the things we know happened is students couldn't get their physical materials. And so institutions said, oh, what can we do? We should at least make sure they get the course materials, which you would think they would be concerned about that anyway. But regardless, so we saw a move to digital because it's just easy to get to. We'd like to think there's other reasons to go digital. But so we saw an acceleration, but it's acceleration of a current trend. One of the things we know from our experience over the last 25 years is things don't go backwards in digital. So what we think is going to happen is there's acceleration. It's going to continue, but it's going to go probably back to the old levels of acceleration.
Yeah, I agree. I think we have seen acceleration at all levels, of using digital. I think probably the biggest challenge that we see is how do we get students engaged, engaged with that digital content. How do we support professors in getting students to finish those courses, to complete those courses? And I think the issue of engagement has we have always dealt with that, right? And I've worked in K-12 before, and you always want to figure out how you're going to keep kids engaged. But right now, I think that's even more acute, and it's a problem that we all need to work to solve. How do we get our students in those platforms and actually be learning and not dropping out and not copying from other platforms, and getting those assignments and that homework actually done and learning. So I think the issue of engagement is something that that we need to improve on collectively, as an industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Packback is a inquiry-based, student inquiry-based led discussion platform. And so what we've been seeing really is, the need for more deeper investment and engagement in asynchronous student engagement platforms, right? And that's obviously was in demand. And we talked to a lot of institutions who are like, yeah, okay, we're not in the classroom, or we don't want to just put all of our students in Zoom. So how do we get them to connect with each other and in a way that, on a time schedule that works for them, and kind of in that continuous environment? So deeper investments, I think, I would expect to see in kind of asynchronous engagement platforms. But I also think, students bringing and curating their own content is a big theme that we saw accelerate, I think, during COVID and will continue, right? So like many other verticals where their consumer base has started to bring and manifest their own content, I think higher education has an opportunity here to think about, how are we embracing student development of content. We have, since 2017, over 1.4 million different sources cited from across the internet by our students. So how are they're curating their content and bringing what they want to use as part of their learning experience. So how are we creating an academic framework for them to use that content and evaluate it in a way that's not, just out on your own, out in the wild, like in a Facebook or Twitter environment across the internet. So those are the things that, we're helping to support institutions say, okay, let's build a framework for your students to bring this content, but let's help them evaluate it critically.
Well, I'll share my perspective, and maybe we kind of piggyback off of this. Like, my take is that there's a binary measure of the change in content, which is the percentage that's gone digital, and as you'd expect, that increased over the past year for obvious reasons. But I think the lasting change is the form factor of the content itself. Is a little bit similar to what you're saying. Is this content simply a digitized version of a traditional text? Or is it built for interaction? Is it built to facilitate more micro assessments and more interactivity? Is it built to be social? Does it enable students to connect? Is it built to be customized? And I think to me the thing, that paradigm to really consider here is that if you think about an incoming, we're focused on higher ed. If you think about an incoming college freshman, they literally would not remember a day before YouTube, unlikely they would remember a day before Instagram. And so there's a bunch of these statements you could give that would basically frame that they're major content consumers. Arguably maybe more so than prior generations, but their definitions of what compels them, what makes for great content is arguably different than prior generations. And so to me, that is both the challenge and also exciting to think about how do you not just digitize the content, but actually find the right form and factor for it. And I don't know, Mike, if that's, obviously you're providing access to all sorts of digital content. I don't know if you have any insight or perspective on that.
Well, one, I think we can probably all agree that if you're going to make things digital, you can add learning elements, and you should. It's difficult to scale that. That's why we don't see that in every course. But some of the folks up here do have platforms that are doing that, which is great, and the things we should do. But there's a fundamental thing that I think we forget about. 85% of all students pre-pandemic either delay or don't even get their course materials, even though half of them know it probably hurts their grade. That's a real problem. Just getting the materials should be something we solve, but once you get it to them, what we know is just adding any level of interactivity, formative assessments, produces the doer effect, which can 6x learning. So, all the folks on this panel have products to do that, lots of people out there, and we should see more of that. And we should see institutions, and this is a question I have, I'd love to hear from you guys, how much do institutions care about that? I know, I'm not talking about theoretically, but care enough to start paying attention to how are students actually doing? What are we doing for students, and what does that mean for them in the long run?
Yeah, I think in terms of what institutions are doing, I think we are seeing some institutions, for example, I think you're touching upon an issue of equity, and how we get, more equitable access, to all the material. So at Wiley, for example, one of the initiatives that we have in math, which is one of the areas where students struggle, we did open one of our courses on adaptive learning, which is Alta and Newton, that many of you are probably familiar with, and we are providing access to that course, for free. So we are partnering with some institutions to provide, that access to students. From the institution standpoint, many of them are going into inclusive access. And that's where we also have that responsibility around affordability. How do we as publishers also make our materials affordable? And it's a form of partnering also with institutions. And again, at Wiley we have made some decisions so that, we can make our materials more affordable and contribute towards that issue of equity. But the issue of interactivity, I think, is one that we need to continue to work on. I think it's about interactive learning designs, and we need to, just like with engagement, I think that's a part of or a layer on engagement. where we need to make our materials more interactive. And it's just not about print to digital or a PDF or an ebook. It's really truly making and thinking, how students interact with content differently. And I love the idea of the shared knowledge economy. I'm fascinated by it because, we talk about the shared economy, but I like to think about the shared knowledge economy. How do we monetize that?
Yeah, I think one of the things we've learned, outside of the pandemic aside, right, is about bringing that social voice, giving everyone at the table kind of that opportunity to how they see that content, how they contribute to the conversation, and engaging with each other. And I think that's really important for institutions to be considering really across all their courses and how they deliver learning.
Yeah, so I agree, I think we hear from institutions quite a bit this desire to create more connection. Right, isolation is an inherent challenge in the moment, and so making it more social is important. The single biggest kind of theme that we've been at Top Hat, our history is really focusing on the professor and not the institution at the core, and that's really that's our legacy and that's our heritage. We've increasingly gotten kind of pulled into the administration with the following ask, which is, look, you have a platform that is built for customizing content for active learning. We have charters that we're trying to go drive. In particular, I think it is starting around affordability and accessibility, so we have charters there. Is there an ability to go partner our faculty on large courses with your technology to custom create content that meets those objectives around affordability and accessibility? And I think they're, from what I've seen, they're not just coming to Top Hat. This is a more of a secular trend, and I think one of the opportunities that gets missed there is, yes, we can go meet. We can design content to be affordable and accessible, but again, are we also designing content that is made for a more modern learner at the same time? And are we focusing on measurable learning objectives that that are fit for purpose here in this environment? But to me, I think one of the opportunities is more bottoms up content creation, both through institutions as well as through faculty collaboration versus the sort of more traditional tops down content development, and that's one that I'm excited about.
Well, and I think it's imperative. Obviously, a big topic of conversation both at this conference and institutions and employers is workforce and skills training development, and that content cannot be developed fast enough. Right? This isn't we don't have time for content to go through a publishing cycle, right? It needs to be happening kind of on the fly. And so institutions need to figure out ways, I think, to how do they make that go through the rigor, right, and evaluation and making sure that content is appropriate, but how do students come to that content and interact with it in an affordable, accessible way? And then, most importantly, and I think we're hearing this a lot from institutions, we want to measure these outcomes, right? We're no longer interested in buying a suite of tools and having, a million different platforms or different partnerships that we can't really evaluate the outcome, both from an ROI perspective, but also really from a learning outcomes perspective. And so that, I think, has been a big shift in the types of conversations that we have with schools.
Yeah, I'd say back to the fundamentals, because there are great tools out there right now for learning. We need better ways to aggregate that data, and institutions can make use of it, and there are certainly folks that are trying to do that. But another fundamental thing is making sure students get access to their tools in an easy fashion. We should make it really easy. It's a complex marketplace. There are a lot of different tools. So whatever we can do to make it so students don't have to think about technology, faculty don't have to think about technology, we can go a long ways.
I'm actually curious, kind of piggyback on that. Any thoughts about how you get to a more consistent student experience or teacher experience? I was at Georgia State a couple of weeks ago. Was preparing to come back, in person, and that was the number one topic of conversation was the cognitive load effect for our learners in basically context switching across across different tools and technologies. So how, obviously there's value in this innovation, but how do you create more consistency in the experience? Is not one I have an answer to, but curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Is there no easy answer, but you should at least make it easy to get in the front door of the other system. And we're better at that. The LMS is generally the place. But a lot of time, just going from 3 clicks to 1 click or not having to manage a code makes a big difference. And it's still confusing out there. Go talk to a college kid, and that's one of the things they'll complain about is they don't complain about the tool necessarily. It's about initially getting to the tool.
Yeah, I mean, I think issues of, this is UX, right, and
Yeah.
and UI, just like many other companies are hiring more and more programmers for making their platforms easier, outside of education, right? I mean, you talk about the, legal tech, right? And all of a sudden you have lawyers who are hiring programmers, to make their experience much easier, right? So I think for us, we also need to change the way that we think about creating that content and really focus on that. Right? It is about having more learning designers. It is about having people who understand how students learn, what teachers need, and that we focus on creating that user experience versus the content, right? The topic here is what is the future of content, but maybe it's more, content. We have plenty of content. It's not because we have a lack of, of knowledge or content. It's about how you deliver that content, and it's about how you make it usable and accessible. So I do agree with your point that is we need to focus on simplicity, making it easy to access. And then once you are in it, I go back to the issue of engagement. You have to hook them. And we have to make those platforms very sticky, right? Is the making your platform sticky, which is very easy to say, but you got to deliver on that is hard, right? And we do that by hiring experts on that usability, UX, and really looking at building our talent a different way.
So maybe we'll open it up in a second, but one last question that we wanted to cover, I think, was, so our assumption is that the future of content is, in some form or fashion, is more digital in nature. And so one of our questions was around the insights or the analytics that this future of content should provide to, whether it's to the learner, to the educator, to the institution. What should the content give us from a data and an insight perspective? And I don't know if you want to chime in there.
I think for each learning objective, like each course, each pathway for each different learner, that's going to be different. I think the way we approach it is sitting down with an institution and individual faculty, program chairs, and deans and saying, let's lead from a place of measurement. Like, let's implement how you want to use Packback and kind of this student-led inquiry model, and how are we going to measure the outcomes before we get started? And I think that is not always how conversations start when folks are considering bringing things into the classroom. It's like, this looks cool. My students will love it. This will be awesome. This will help my teaching, right? And then you get to the end and you go, well, did we set this up for success? Do we know how we're going to measure the effectiveness of this? And so I think it's hard to necessarily say that this is what we should be measuring. It's as much about having that conversation and ensuring that it's a part of the dialogue, when you're sitting down. And I think that it's an incumbent part of the discussion, both from the partner side as well as the institution side, that they're each holding each other accountable in that. Now, the wealth of data that then stems and flows from that, I think, is exciting, because now we start to see the connectivity between engagement tools, content tools, student services tools, right? And bringing all of those things together and connecting those pieces and actually taking action on them to influence the student experience. From the time I've been working in ed tech, there's been a lot of one day all these data elements will connect to each other and we'll be able to have this amazing student experience. And I think we're starting to see that become a reality, right? We're starting to see a place where data silos are starting to break down. Some large players are stepping into the space to build these data lakes and start to help institutions to connect these dots. And now some institutions are putting operational procedures in place to be able to actually take action on this data. And so that I think is really exciting. So that's how I think about it a little bit more.
Yeah, and I mean, I think when it comes to data, again, there's like an abundance of data that we are collecting, everywhere. I think institutions, in our platforms. I think the issue is, what do you do with that data, right? Are you using that data to inform instruction? Are you using that data to become a better learner? In our case, I'm a strong believer of, adaptive learning, an adaptive assessment. So you collect that data, and then you use technology to make it very specific. Where are the areas that you need to improve on? Where are the areas that you can grow into? And also how you can make other connections. I think we haven't talked much about skills, and we haven't talked much about, real world applications, but I was just reading a report about Generation Alpha. Those are the ones who were born between 2010 and 2025. And those are our future customers, right? Those are the ones who are going to be in those universities and in those high schools, very quickly. And, they come with different expectations, in how they want to learn. They are favoring more skills versus degrees, right? And they are favoring, gaming versus, other more passive ways of learning. So we need to start collecting data and the use of technology, artificial intelligence, et cetera, machine learning, so that we can also make those accommodations in our platforms to know where are the different learning styles that are coming our way. And how we're going to serve them well moving forward. So, from our perspective, what we can do today is going back to your point of usability, and how can we make those dashboards very usable and actually very concrete? How do we make the dashboards? How do we create them and design them so that instructors can use them well and efficiently and effectively, and so can students, so that they can map out their map. They can map out where they want to go, where they're going to graduate. And for us, we need to start collecting those data points through integrations, also with multiple platforms, I believe.
Yeah, thinking about just the student side of that, I'm an educator by background and training, and while it wasn't it was a couple of generations ago, students. Still, students tend to think about assessment as a grade in a red pen scenario, and it's just a grade and we move on, as opposed to a blue pen, something that helps them learn. And a lot of the tools out there now, the biggest thing they're doing is just transforming students to think about assessment as a part of the learning process, as opposed to something that's summative and at the end. And that little things, I go back to the fundamental simple things we can do. That's transformative. And almost all the tools out there do that. And if we can get that data to the institution, to the faculty to help them change, that's a big bonus. But just that change at the student level can have a really tremendous effect.
So, just round it out. My take is there's like the ultra marathon is certainly in the aggregation of data into centralized systems where you can build personalization and predictability around it. But I think there's a lot of power in sort of what you can do in the moment on a more micro level in terms of I got access to a lot of dashboards. Most of us do. I don't spend a lot of time in those dashboards, but to me, having some basic workflow kind of triggers and automation to help me, tell me where to go focus tomorrow is really helpful. So a sort of pragmatic example was I was speaking to a business school professor who said, look, traditionally I've spent the first 45 minutes of lecture just trying to get some sense for where are the students coming in today? Have they read anything? Where's their comprehension level? And it's basically lost time. And what I'm able to start to do with some of these kind of digital content and learning tools is to come in knowing this is exactly where I'm going to start, because nobody understood that concept. It was clear through the more of the blue ink assessment, as you put it, that they just didn't get it. And so that's great. We're able to get into a discussion right away versus versus me talking at them. And so I think there's a lot of power, and I actually think a lot of it comes down to enablement more so than the technology. How do you teach and enable in small micro ways to go use this data in a pragmatic way?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, just to chime in on that, which is, empowering the faculty to have a better in-course experience and really putting the power back into their hands by using a lot of the information and giving them insight into what's happening with the students real time, right? Beyond kind of some yes-no questions or already staring at a Zoom screen or in a large lecture hall, not dissimilar to this. You're looking out and you're saying, well, are they really getting this? And so watching them, whether it be through discussion, through their assessments, right? You really get a sense of how they're engaging with the material. And, we see faculty members pivoting all the time, saying, wow, I had no idea. I got to go back and really redo this. I mean, how students are grappling with this material, the sources that they're citing, that we've missed the mark entirely. And it's time to go back, to the basics.
And I will just share that we recently did a market survey at Wiley on hybrid learning, right? And one of the issues that came up, and that continues to come up, which you would think after 2 years of teaching online, we would be over that challenge. But actually, it came back that many instructors continue to struggle on how to teach online, right? So thinking about how we need to design our platforms or how we can support those instructors become more effective teachers, they still need support on how you teach online or how you teach hybrid, or so it was kind of a surprising data point for me to continue to hear so overwhelmingly that they continue to struggle on how you teach online. So the support that we can provide on our platforms as well to that effect, I think will be well received.
Yeah, and I think the support that can be provided will translate back to the classroom as well. Because, not to be too provocative here, but a lot of faculty actually struggle to teach in the classroom. Yep. They may not know it, but they're not trained to be teachers. That's not it. I've been both a teacher and I've been a professor, and it's just not what they were trained to do. So it's not that they don't want to teach well. I think all of them want to teach well, but where we can give them the tools to make it just easier for students to learn, they appreciate it.
That's a really great point. Yeah.
Should we, any questions? Small group here, so we can probably just shout.
On that issue of the faculty, that's where I would like a little more insight. If there's a spectrum of the one end of the Arizona State dreamscape thing, which is super cool. The other end, hey, I figured out how to use Zoom, leave me alone. Are the faculty a problem? Are they part of the solution, part of the problem? If you could weigh in on that.
Well, I'll give you my perspective. My background is being a part of, digital transformation in a number of vertical industries, but not in education. My view is that technology companies in particular, which arguably, many of these are, or content companies, you're in the change management business fundamentally. That doesn't mean you provide a product. That means the whole role is to design a change management curve. And so my view on it, and this is what I've been saying to all of our teams, is our design principle is essentially, if we know there's efficacy in what we go provide for the faculty, and in the case of Top Hat, that's always been our customer, it's always been our focus there, we have no problem getting the first 10% to get excited about it, be early adopters. But for us, success is how do we carry forward, those who have trepidation around the change or don't understand it. And I think, I do believe, for us, some of that is going to be investing in, more heavily in things like services. We've found that when we're trying to teach a new way of using these tools, in the cases where we've said, look, we're going to put our team on campus for the first 60 days of class, and we're going to sit with faculty and help them understand how to start to use this, how to customize it, that pays off in a tremendous way in the long term. I think ultimately the other piece, which is probably a tension around academic freedom, and is we have historically said we want to offer an abundance of choice and flexibility to faculty. Another approach here, which I think we will do more of, is we want to provide guided paths. So we want to default the best practices versus kind of put you in the paradox of choice of I'm not sure what to do next. So it's a long way of saying my view is that change. To do change management well, you sort of have to focus on who are going to be the most difficult to move along that path versus focus on the early adopters, which I think is sometimes the shiny object.
Yeah, I think they have to be part of the solution. At Packback, we have a SaaS technology, but really the way we approach and work with our faculty is about the pedagogical shift from teacher-led discussion to a student-led inquiry model, in which case, that is a lot about change management. You're right. It's, a lot of times the first question is, but what if my students ask the wrong questions? Which we take a moment, we pause, we reset, and we say, oh yeah, that's part of the point. That's it. That's exactly right. So, if you're not engaging with the faculty and meeting them where they are and helping them move through that process, then none of this is going to really work.
Chime in quickly. I imagine, Mike. So my view is, I do believe that is the future in some form or another. I think it's hard, if you look at content in any other industry, open networks win in the long run. Open networks meaning more of the Spotify, or, I'm able to self-select. I don't have to talk to a salesperson. I'm a salesperson. Nobody wants to talk to a salesperson. I don't have to talk to a salesperson. I can seamlessly put it together. I do believe that's the future. I think that's scary to a lot of us, and it will force innovation. But that innovation, I think, will serve the market and serve the customer better.
Yeah, I'll win. There's already a lot of content out there that people could go and do it. Not great tools to put it together, but it takes work. And so I think we are heading in that direction, but there have to be tools to make it super easy for faculty to mix and match. For that reason, I think there's always going to be a market for prepackaged things. We're going to make it easier for people to select among those things. In higher ed, we don't even have a set of objectives per course. There's no national standards for courses. So that structure needs to be in place, and then there need to be the tools to have all the content tagged. And a lot of people are thinking about that, but it's a big step to get there. And again, it has to be super easy.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's hard. We don't have a crystal ball to know what the future would be like. But I think from a content perspective, I agree with you 100%. We are talking about learning, and we are talking about high quality learning. And if we think about how we are going to train our students to compete in a global market, where it's just not about the US, it's about Asian students who are coming in, Russian students who are coming in, and we are going to be competing, and we are training people who are going to be competing in a very global market. So to open content that has not been curated. We know what happens with information, right? And fake news, without going any farther. But how do we know that engineers, are getting cutting edge content that is going to make them the best in the world? that are going to, or mathematicians, or, I don't care, pick a profession, right? So I do think that when it comes to learning and when it comes to the content that we are still delivering, there will be a need for experts that can validate that content. And I think that is the role also that we play as, as creators of content and working with our partners. Now, whether all of that content is going to be in an open platform where you are going to pick and choose, I don't know. I could see it. I could see it happening. What I do think is that we'll need to figure out new models, new business models for people to access that content and to build their career paths and to tap into what they want to learn and how they want to learn it, and that we can deliver on that, so they can become engineers or doctors or whatever they want to become, and really attend the needs of the marketplace, right? We need to make that connection, and that's one of our, that's kind of our mission also at Wiley, which is how do we build that connection to the job market? We have companies that are requesting people with certain skills, and we are not creating a pipeline, with students that are ready, to meet that demand. So, and we need to train them well, right? So we need to measure and we need to, again, curate that content. So, so I don't know, but it's a very provocative question.
Let me add one thing to that. We do see this happening. We have great examples here. WGU, they build everything, and they have teams of instructional designers. It's not faculty doing it. And I think we're going to see more of that as institutions begin to pay more attention to, are they serving their students well? But it's going to be professionals at the instructional designer stage that are trying to design the experiences that their institution needs their students to have. And they're going to draw from a variety of different technologies and content.
Yeah, I mean, students are doing that today, right? I mean, they are going to YouTube. I don't have any fancy statistic for you, but we all do it ourselves, right? In our everyday life, the students are doing it as well. They're going to YouTube and they're learning what they need to learn. They're going to Twitter and Facebook and all sorts of sources. So to a certain extent, it's already happening, right? Students are bringing together the content in which they want to learn. It's nice that we have, prescribed content as part of the course that someone has to purchase. But if I can't purchase it, but I still need the course, I'm going to figure out a way to get to the end. And so, I think like most good industries, the change comes from the consumer. The consumer here is the student, and I think we're going to start to see in the learner, we'll start to see that change even more rapidly post-COVID.
All right, maybe one more question.
Yeah, so you can talk about format changing and better access, and I keep thinking back in 2005, before gamer market, right? When the apps came out on the iPhone, you had new formats of content, you had better access, and you had this giant, now $80 billion market of casual gamers that appeared who didn't consider themselves gamers before. You saw the same thing with the music industry, the same thing with the TV, cable industry, but that hasn't happened in education. It hasn't happened in books. And I suspect it's because the format still hasn't changed. Take an ebook, but it still looks like it came off the Gutenberg press. So even though we've added links and images to it, why are we still pushing content that looks like it came off the Gutenberg press instead of formats that appeal to the way the mental models work today?
Well, I'd say that is true. There has been a lot of progress, and you can get some really cool stuff in digital, but it's a different market. Students don't say, oh, you know what, I'm going to wake up today, I want to go find a course material so I can learn pediatrics. It's the things you're talking about, those are amusement. And it's a very different market, and that's why I'm skeptical about the Spotify and Netflix type analogies for this market, because course materials are very specific. And again, 85% of students aren't delaying or not getting course materials because they're bad materials. It's just because they don't know where to go. It's a confusing marketplace. It turns out the experience for print's not that great either, but even if you had a great experience, I'm not sure how much students are really going to wake up today and say, I really want to go find a great textbook.
We're at I think we're getting counted down. We're about at time, but I think it's like that's to me as a provocative question. I do think it's going to radicalize more than than we see today, and I do think that COVID it's an inflection point and it's going to unfold over the next 10 or so years. But I do personally expect it to be more open and more social and more co-created. But I think this is a great discussion. Hopefully we did okay without a moderator.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.